Hey guys, thanks for listening in to the stories. We're a new channel with great stories to come and would really appreciate if you could help us out and subscribe. Let's make this new channel grow. The shrill beep of my 5 a.m. alarm jolted me awake. As I groggily got ready for work, I thought about calling in sick. The memories of yesterday still haunted me. But I knew my team needed me, so I pushed through the exhaustion. Walking through those sliding hospital doors felt different today. The bright fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell no longer seemed comforting. Instead, they now triggered flashes of that traumatic moment from the operating room. I tried to shake it off as I started my shift, busying myself with charts and medications, using every distraction possible. But during quiet moments, my mind inevitably wandered back to him. Everything had started normally when he was brought into the operating room area. My role was to monitor the patient while the surgeon and his team performed the routine bowel resection. I carefully observed the screens displaying his heartbeat, blood pressure, and oxygen levels, ready to alert the team if anything went awry. At first, the patient remained stable as they worked, but about halfway through the procedure, his blood pressure began to steadily drop. I quickly notified the surgeon, and nurses scrambled to discover the cause. Fluids and medications were administered, but nothing improved the situation. Then suddenly, the monitors began emitting alarmed beeps and flashed warnings. The patient had gone into cardiac arrest, his heartbeat slowing to a crawl. We immediately initiated CPR while the surgeon attempted to locate and stop any internal bleeding. But it was too late. Despite our emergency efforts, his heart soon stopped altogether. We were ultimately forced to call his time of death while still in the operating room. I replayed those moments over and over as I moved through my shift, questioning if I had missed some early sign of trouble that could have prevented the tragic outcome. Though logically I knew we had done everything possible, I still felt the sting of defeat. We strive so hard in the OR to save lives, not lose them. As evening finally approached, I warily changed out of my scrubs, dreading the thought of going home and lying awake all night with those images running through my mind. The drive home passed in a blur of mental and physical exhaustion. After a quick microwave dinner, I collapsed straight into bed without even showering. My body craved sleep, but my mind continued buzzing with unwanted replays of the surgery gone wrong. Eventually, I slipped into a fitful, restless slumber. Sometime in the early morning hours, the visions invaded my dreams. I was back in the OR, only now a nightmare version. The patient sat bolt upright on the table, surgical tools still protruding grotesquely from his lifeless body. He locked eyes with me and cried out in a booming voice, "Why didn't you save me?" I awoke with a loud gasp, heart pounding. Disoriented, it took me a moment to get my bearings and realize it was just a dream. I glanced at the clock, 3:17. Knowing more sleep would be impossible, I lay there replaying the chilling images from my subconscious. When the alarm sounded at 6, I had barely slept another wink. With bleary eyes, I forced myself up and through the morning routine. I seriously considered calling in again, but didn't think I could handle sitting home alone with my thoughts. At least work would provide a distraction. The second day creeped by, every mundane task requiring immense effort. Mercifully, no critical cases came to the OR that could trigger my trauma. As I zombie walked through my shift, several coworkers asked if I was all right. I just claimed exhaustion. How could I tell them what was really going on inside my head? That night, I skipped dinner entirely and went straight to bed, praying for restful sleep. But soon the haunting dream returned. Over and over through the night, the patient bolting up and shouting at me about his death. I awoke in panicked sweats at least 5 times. By morning, I knew I couldn't go on like this. The lack of sleep was affecting my ability to function, and the graphic nightmares were taking a toll on my mental health. I realized I needed to talk to someone about what I had experienced in the room. I couldn't keep these disturbing visions bottled up alone. I researched therapists in the area who specialized in counseling medical professionals. Many of my colleagues saw it as a weakness to ask for mental help, but I knew I needed it. I booked an appointment for the next day, the first step in dealing with my trauma. Sitting in the therapist's calm, quiet office, I hesitantly described the recurring nightmares. She listened with an empathetic ear, assuring me these dreams were a normal reaction to trauma. She said my brain was trying to process the experience, though in a dysfunctional way. I met with her weekly after that initial visit. She taught me techniques to stop blaming myself for what happened to the patient. I hadn't failed him simply because the outcome was unfavorable. In time, the nightly visions began to subside. It's been almost a year now since that surgery gone wrong. Occasionally, thoughts about the patient still surface, but no longer plague my dreams. Processing the emotions with an impartial therapist lifted an immense weight. My outlook moving forward is forever changed. Though I still feel the sadness of losing a patient under my care, I refuse to shoulder misplaced guilt. As long as I give my best effort, I cannot blame myself for what is beyond my control. Medicine involves balancing triumph and tragedy. I'm learning to accept both. Working the graveyard shift as a security guard at the old county hospital has always given me the creeps. But lately, things have taken a turn for the truly disturbing. For the past few weeks, I've been hearing bizarre bangs and clangs echoing up from the basement morgue in the wee hours of the morning. At first, I figured it was just the antiquated pipes and ducts rattling in the drafty subterranean halls, but the unearthly sounds have grown steadily louder and more frequent over the past month. The basement has always freaked me out, with its flickering fluorescent lights and endless concrete corridors. The morgue especially gives me the willies. Row after row of cold metal body drawers fill the main autopsy room, while the walk-in freezers preserve their grim contents. The off-putting stench of harsh chemicals barely covers the ever-present smell of death. Working up the courage to go check out those ominous noises in the depths of the night takes every bit of willpower I have. But investigating disturbances is my sworn duty as a security officer, no matter how much I may inwardly cringe. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I heard the most terrifying crash yet. The unmistakable sound of heavy metal objects violently hitting the floor and echoing through the concrete halls. The chilling bang reverberated up the stairwell, setting my nerves on edge instantaneously. Though every instinct told me to walk in the other direction, I steeled my resolve and headed apprehensively towards the source. With each step, I descended into the inky blackness of the hospital basement, the fluorescent lights seeming to dim and flicker in greeting. "Turn back," urged the voice in my head, but I pressed onward. Approaching the imposing double doors of the morgue, I listened intently, but was met with dead silence. The long hallway stood empty and still, the only sound the buzzing lights overhead. With trembling hands, I slowly pushed open the heavy door. They creaked ominously on their hinges, echoing through the tiled chamber. I lingered in the threshold, squinting into the dim room. Thick shadows shrouded the corners, obscuring my view of the rows of gleaming metal body drawers. Along the far wall, the bulky silhouettes of equipment and supply cabinets loomed, but all was motionless within. "Security! Is anyone there?" I called out, despite the aura of stillness. My own wavering voice echoed back at me from all sides. With reluctant steps, I entered and shined my flashlight around the room. The beam glinted off shiny surfaces but revealed no hidden presence. I methodically inspected every inch, even peering into the body freezer, but there was no sign of intrusion or disturbance. No clues whatsoever as to what could have caused that violent cacophony. Uneasy and confused, I hastily retreated from that unsettling space. The heavy doors clanged shut behind me with an air of ominous finality. I glanced back, despite myself, as I headed upstairs, but nothing stirred in the void behind me. What in the world was going on down there at night? Surely it was just my overactive imagination playing tricks on me. Yet the inexplicable noises persisted over the following week, setting my nerves perpetually on edge. It all came to a head last Tuesday night. I had just checked on the seemingly comatose patients in the cancer ward when a sudden, deafening crash jarred me to my core. It was followed by an ungodly metallic screech, like heavy furniture being forcibly dragged across the floor. The sounds were undeniably rising from the depths of the basement. Years of horror movie tropes flashed through my mind, fueling my growing panic. But I knew there was no backing down now. I had to investigate. With rising trepidation, I crept down the stairs, sweaty palm gripped tightly around my flashlight. The dreary hallway seemed to stretch on forever, shadows clinging to every corner. Approaching the morgue entrance, I steeled my nerves and plunged inside. I meticulously inspected every inch, even the dark walk-in freezers. But as before, absolutely nothing seemed disturbed or amiss. I was just about to turn and leave when a bone-chilling sensation stopped me dead in my tracks. The unmistakable feeling of a cold, heavy hand firmly grasping my shoulder from behind. I cried out in shock, whirling around and stumbling back. My flashlight beam swept wildly across the room, revealing nothing and no one. Yet I could still feel the ghostly touch lingering on my shoulder. That was it. I fled that cursed morgue and didn't stop until I was upstairs under the fluorescent lights of the main lobby. I spent the remainder of the shift jumping at every errant sound, constantly peering over my shoulder, half expecting to see some nightmare apparition pursuing me up from the depths. The final hours crawled by at an excruciating pace. When the morning security team finally arrived to relieve me just before dawn, I practically sprinted to the parking lot. Even safely in my car, my heart was still racing as I sped out of the darkness surrounding the hospital. The terrors of that night replayed in an endless loop in my mind. There was no denying it anymore. Something sinister lurked in that morgue. The old hospital was well and truly haunted. I knew then and there I'd never set foot in that godforsaken basement again. First thing in the morning, I was putting in for a transfer far, far away from. When I regained consciousness, I found myself alone in a dim hospital room. Disoriented, I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain radiating from my abdomen made me gasp and sink back onto the pillow. I must have passed out again, because when I next opened my eyes, rays of pale morning sunshine were peeking around the edges of the blinds. Blinking against the brightness, I carefully took in my surroundings. I was lying in a narrow bed with rails on both sides. An IV stand next to me held a clear bag, the tube connected to the back of my hand. The mint green walls and small TV mounted in the corner told me I was in a standard hospital room. As my mind cleared, I recalled being admitted for surgery to remove a tumor. It had all happened so quickly. The diagnosis, consultations with my surgeon, the battery of pre-op tests, and finally being prepped for the operation and fading off under anesthesia. Now that it was over, I was eager to see a doctor or nurse and find out the details. How did the surgery go? Were they able to remove all of the tumor? What was the next step? I glanced at my phone on the bedside table. No signal, and the call button was out of reach. With effort, I sat up slightly and listened for any movement in the hallway outside my door. But the only sound was the soft hum of the heating vents. Where was the medical team? Why was it so quiet on this floor? I settled back into the pillows, deciding a nurse would come check on me soon. But as the minutes ticked by, the silence in the ward became oppressive. Shouldn't there be some signs of life by now, even this early? Beeping monitors, wheels squeaking, low voices. The longer I waited, the more uneasy I felt. Exhausted from the surgery, I must have drifted off. When I opened my eyes again, bright sunlight streamed in through the window. I checked the time on the wall clock. 11:42 a.m. Late morning now, so where was everyone? Straining to hear something, anything, I detected a faint murmuring from the hallway. I held my breath, listening intently. Were those whispered voices? I couldn't make out words, only soft babbling that trailed off as quickly as it had started. I shook my head. Surely I was just groggy and imagining things. But my disquiet grew. I had to get up and try to find someone who could tell me what was going on. Bracing against the soreness, I slowly sat up and swung my legs off the bed. I froze when my bare feet hit the icy floor. Where were my slippers? I always wore them when admitted. After scanning the room, I didn't see them anywhere. With growing unease, I slid my feet into my shoes instead. Leaning on the IV pole for support, I shuffled to the door and peered out. The hallway was dim and empty, not a soul around. I crept out of my room, glancing around. The nurse's station just down the hall was also deserted, chairs neatly pushed in. Was I on the wrong floor? I moved slowly past vacant rooms, perfectly tidy but unoccupied. No mistake, this was the post-op wing where I had been brought. So where was everyone? I was passing an open doorway when a dark figure darted across the entrance and into the room. I jumped and called out, "Hello?" No response. Catching my breath, I hurried over to check. Also empty? I stood very still, blinking into the shadows and listening intently. A scraping sound followed by a muffled thump came from a supply closet across the hall. Heart pounding, I crept over to the closet where I had seen the fleeting figure. Peering in, I saw metal shelves neatly stacked with folded linens, hospital gowns, and boxes of gloves. But then I heard it again, a scuffling from the back, behind a shelf somewhere. I backed out and rushed back to my room, panicking. I had to get out of this deserted wing. With trembling hands, I removed the IV, threw on a sweater, and slipped my feet into my sneakers. I checked the hallway again. Still no signs of life, only endless vacant corridors washed in the red glow of the setting sun. I shuffled to the exit as quickly as I could, clutching my abdomen against the pain. The double doors ahead beckoned me, illuminated exit signs glowing. I shouldered through them, desperate to find another living soul on the other side. The next hallway looked the same, empty nursing stations, dark and silent rooms. Moving faster, half stumbling in my haste, I followed more glowing exit signs, bursting through doors to each new wing. All deserted. Finally, I came to a cavernous lobby, the front entrance in sight. I quickened my pace, wincing with every step. Almost there, but as I neared the revolving doors, I noticed yellow caution tape crisscrossing the entrance, blocking the way out. Heart sinking, I turned in a circle, taking in the entire vacant scene. Not a security guard, receptionist, or visitor in sight. Where was everyone? Then I spotted a sign near the elevator bank. Hospital closed for renovations. Use east entrance. Relief flooded through me and I almost laughed aloud. The hospital was under construction, sections temporarily closed off. No wonder it was so empty back there. With renewed energy, I followed signs directing me to the east wing entrance. I stepped outside into warmth of the late-day sun and hurried towards the parking lot, ready to put this unsettling experience behind me and focus on my recovery. It was supposed to be just another routine night shift at the hospital. As an emergency nurse with several years of experience under my belt, I thought I'd seen it all. But I wasn't prepared for the events that unfolded that evening, events that still haunt me to this day. It started innocuously enough. A disheveled older man was wheeled into the emergency room around 2 a.m. He had been found wandering the streets, agitated and muttering gibberish. The police who brought him in didn't know anything about his identity or medical history. All they knew was that he needed psychiatric attention. As soon as I saw the wild look in his eyes, I could tell this patient would be a handful. He thrashed around on the gurney, screaming and cursing. My colleagues and I struggled to restrain him long enough to get him into an examination room. His strength was almost superhuman. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, his wrinkled face took on a sinister cast. But it was his eyes that truly unsettled me. Bloodshot, darting around manically, boring into me with unsettling intensity. I could feel him peering into my very soul. Once we finally wrestled him onto the exam table, his screams gave way to a stream of bizarre utterances. At first I thought it was just generic ravings, but then he said things no stranger could possibly know. Deeply personal details about my life and past, things I had never dared share with anyone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. How could he know so much about me? As I shakily tried to take his vitals, he continued his tirade, each secret he revealed making my blood run colder. I searched his weathered face, looking for some glimmer of recognition, trying to place how he could have acquired such intimate knowledge. But his eyes were empty, feral. When he hissed that he knew my darkest secrets, my hands began to tremble. What was this man? Some kind of sinister mind reader, Gritting my teeth, I resolved not to let him get to me. After we sedated him, I avoided looking at him, focusing intently on my nursing duties. But I could feel his ominous presence, hear his cryptic mutterings as he succumbed to the drugs. I felt his eyes on me, even as he drifted off. The uneasy feeling lingered, even after I had clocked out. On the drive home, my mind raced. I took every turn with caution, irrationally half expecting him to jump out from the shadows. At home, I tossed and turned all night, plagued by nightmares where he relentlessly stalked me. The next week passed in a fog. I jumped at small noises, suspicious of everything. My husband's concerned queries were met with terse denials that anything was wrong. How could I begin to explain it to him? He would think me crazy if I told him I suspected a patient was psychic. Eventually, morbid curiosity drew me back to the hospital. I hesitantly asked about the disturbed older man, hoping he had been discharged. Instead, I learned he had been admitted to the psychiatric ward, where his erratic behavior had only gotten worse. He had to be physically restrained and medicated. But even then, he made disturbing outbursts, seeming to know secrets about the staff. I left the front desk in a daze, more rattled than ever. Part of me wanted to confront the man, to demand answers about how he knew so much about me. But another part was deeply afraid of what I might learn. What if he truly had some supernatural power? Over the next few weeks, I became increasingly paranoid, lighting candles around my home to ward off evil spirits and eyeing strangers with suspicion. My sleep continued to be plagued by nightmares. I'd wake in a cold sweat, my husband's concerned face hovering over me. But I still said nothing, fearful he'd insist I see a psychiatrist as well. Work became a nerve-wracking ordeal. I'd wear my scrubs days in a row, too anxious to change at the hospital and risk encountering the mysterious patient. In my distraction, I made careless mistakes, confusing medication orders, forgetting patient requests. My colleagues noticed the changes, their worried glances following me, but I brushed off their concerns with weak excuses about not sleeping well. Only I knew the chilling truth. After each shift, I'd sit paralyzed in my car for long minutes, working up the courage to make the drive home. At red lights, I'd study the faces of pedestrians, searching for those haunting eyes, that twisted grin. I stopped parking in my driveway at night, scared he'd learn where I lived. This went on for weeks until finally I snapped. Bursting into the psychiatric ward, I demanded to see the older patient. An orderly tried to stop me, but I shoved past him. There, in a small padded room, I found the man, hunched in a corner. My voice shook as I asked him how he knew those things about me, and what else he knew. His disturbing cackle was my only reply. Defeated, I fled the hospital, finally accepting that I might never learn the truth. In the years since, the fear has faded, but it's never completely gone away. I still glance over my shoulder when I'm alone at night. Still dread looking into unfamiliar eyes, worried I'll see that knowing gleam. It's always there, the ominous sense that somehow, somewhere, my darkest secrets are known. And try as I might, I'll never completely escape the uneasy feeling that seized me that night so long ago.